We visited the Viking exhibit at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, Canada. From weapons to jewelry and more, I'll share with you all of these treasures in this video coming up. Welcome to Costume Co. I do weekly videos where I analyze costumes from many of your favorite shows and movies. So if this is something you're interested in, consider subscribing and hitting the bell notification icon. With shows like the History Channel's Viking series about legendary Viking hero Ragnar Lothbrok, interest in Viking lore and history has never been more popular. Shows like Vikings take creative liberties about what Scandinavians actually wore in the Viking Age. So I'm considering analyzing these costumes of the series Vikings. So if this is something that interests you, please leave a comment below. Vikings the Exhibition is the largest collection of Viking artifacts on display in North America. It's in partnership with the Swedish History Museum in Stockholm, Sweden, who loaned nearly 500 original objects from their own collections, many of these objects rarely seen outside of Scandinavia. The exhibit opened to the public on November 4th at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, Canada, and it runs for a limited time until April 4th, 2018. So we had the pleasure of being invited for a special media presentation on November 1st. The majority of what I've presented here comes from Vikings exhibit at the ROM, but I have also sought out some outside sources for additional information. John Bissetches, director and CEO of the ROM, stated in a media release, "This exhibition presents a new and unexpected interpretation of the Vikings as not only seafaring warriors, but a people who built a rich and varied culture. Our visited will be surprised by what they see. The ROM showing is the first exhibition of Vikings we've ever staged, and we're particularly delighted to include a Canadian perspective that contributes to our understanding of the Viking history of Canada." One notable myth that has been debunked is that Vikings cared little about their own appearance. Men, however, were known to trim and bleach their beards with lye, creating a reddish color, and both men and women wore a type of eyeliner known as kohl. Here's a rare example of wool textile fragments. Due to decomposition, textile fragments are rarely found, and most finds of Viking-era fabric are from grave goods, like this example seen here, which is from Uppland, Sweden. Here's an image of a surviving textile of silver-on fabric. This remnant shows a stag turning its head, and it's from a grave find in Uppland, Sweden. This surviving pouch is made of bronze fur and paper. The bronze mountings of the belt are fastened onto squirrel fur. Here's a woman wearing Viking reproduction clothing wearing a similar pouch on her belt. Pouches were both decorative and also used as a way to store items since clothing had no pockets. These garments from the Viking exhibit are reproductions of clothing from the Viking Age. Homespun wool and linen were the most popular fabrics, while silk was for only the wealthiest of families and would have been acquired through trade. Linen, more often than not, was used in undergarments as it was closer to the skin. The Viking Age man wore a woolen tunic and a loose or fitted trousers and a wool mantle or long coat. And the trousers were kept up with a drawstring, while women wore a full-length tunic with a woolen overdress that looked sort of like a pinafore that was held in place by two brooches. The men in the women's tunic or kirtle is similarly constructed to that of the kaftan or the kurti, which is a Persian collarless shirt. Children wore similar garments to the adults, and the garments would have been dyed using natural plant dyes that produce rather vibrant colors like red, blue, and yellow. Wealthier families would wear clothes trimmed and embroidered in silver and gold work, and with wristbands and edges decorated with thin ribbons of woven silk. Trim and woven belts were created with a process called tablet weaving, as seen pictured on the left, while drawstrings, like the ones worn in men's pants, were made by finger braiding, as seen on the right. It was mainly women who carded, spun, sewed, wove, and embroidered, but men were probably involved in some type of textile tasks. Most work was done on a small scale at home or in special weaving workshops. Here is a breakdown of how a woman's undertunic would have been constructed. The garment is made from a front and back panel with the neck hole cut out, one-piece sleeves, and gussets under the arms and gores in the skirt for ease of movement. On the bottom, you can see how almost no fabric was wasted when marking out the pattern on the fabric. And while there is precious little information about how the fabric was held together in the Viking era, it's likely it was sewn in a very labor-intensive practice. Modern reproductions, such as a woman's Viking-era tunic, takes about 25 hours of labor at a rate of about 1 meter per hour. Surprisingly, these iron scissors look similar to our modern-day scissors. I didn't actually see this pair at the Vikings exhibit, so I thought I'd share this pair from the Swedish History Museum from a find in Västmanland, Sweden. These ones would have been used to cut textiles. Here are some sewing needles from the exhibit. All of these pieces are made from bone antler and come from upland Sweden. Needle cases like the one seen on the right were used to hold and protect the needles and also worn as a decoration on a woman's garment. This particular one is from a grave find in Åland, Sweden. The Viking Age clothing has a very similar look to that of the Anglo-Saxons, which were a group of people from Germanic tribes who migrated to Great Britain in the 5th century from continental Europe. This image seen here is of reenactors, and it's taken from the West Stow Anglo-Saxon Village website in Suffolk, England. And also we have a reproduction of clothing seen in their museum. Here's an example of men in reproduction Viking clothing. Some of the Germanic people are known to have worn putty-like leg wrappings from knee to foot to gather the excess fabric of their baggy trousers. The man on the right wears gray leg wraps. From the Viking exhibit, here are 3 examples of dyed skeins, which is a length of thread or yarn, loosely coiled and knotted, with plant dyes madder, woad, and weld, which I think might be a great name for a folk band or maybe even a law firm. Madder is one of the oldest dye steps. The primary dye component is called alizarin, which is found in the roots of the plant and makes a very good quality red dye. In medieval Europe, dyer's woad was the only source of blue dye for textiles. The leaves of the woad plant contain the same dye as Indian indigo, although in a weaker concentration. Dyer's weld, or dyer's rocket, was in use by the first millennium BC, and perhaps earlier than even woad or madder. It produces a bright and beautiful yellow and combines with dyer's woad for emerald and leaf greens. Dye from weld serves equally well for linen, wool, and silk. Synthetic dyes would eventually replace these natural dyes, although I have discovered that some medieval societies will grow and harvest these plants for their dye in an attempt to reproduce these textiles. So you can also purchase dyes madder, woad, and weld from online retailers. I'll leave a link in the description if you care to check it out. Here are 2 exceptional examples of pendants from the exhibit. On the left is a pendant of Thor's hammer. It is silver and it's a filigree ornamentation. This pendant has the shape of Thor's hammer, which is an object that could have been used in both connection to burials and cult activities. It is the only one of its kind and it's exceptionally fine craftsmanship. While on the right we have a pendant in silver. The pendant is in the shape of a male head. On the head, there is a bird with its wings spread out on the side down the ears. The pendant comes from a unique grave find containing objects of precious metals, marking the deceased as a great importance in society. The grave belonged to a woman, but the male head may represent the masculine ideal of the time. And that one is from Östergötland, Sweden. Here are 2 examples of coin-type pendants. The one on the left is an original dirham or Arabic silver dollar that was minted in the 9th century, but the fine spot of the original is unknown, while the one on the right is a Christian imitation of an Islamic dirham, probably minted in Kiev sometime in the early 10th century. This gold, silver, and bronze pendant is an exquisite example. The pendant is in the shape of a fishtail and consists of 35 pieces in total. It's from a hoard find in Cross Guldrup, Gotland, Sweden. Here's an example of an exquisite set of beads that are made from bronze, glass, and gold, and they're in a set of 6 rows. These beads of glass and precious metals are a magnificent and rare example of a wealthy woman's personal belongings, and they hail from Gotland, Sweden, in a grave find. This chain garnish is bronze and it's of Baltic origin. Sometimes instead of beads, Baltic women often wore chain garnish across the chest. This example here is from Uppland, Sweden. And these 2 torques that are also seen here, the one is twisted and the other one is of Baltic origin, and they're from Uppland, Sweden as well. This silver torque is a hårdfryn from Södermanland, Sweden, and the torque is sort of a rigid style choker. These silver bracelets are all reproductions except for the broken piece, which is a hårdfryn from Södermanland, Sweden. And remarkably, they would not at all look out of place in the 21st century. As the Vikings moved from mythology to Christianity, the deer was used as a symbol of Christ in the early church of Scandinavia, which is why the symbol appears on early brooches. During the 9th and 10th centuries, high-status Scandinavian women often wore gilded brooches and colorful strands of beads. On the left are 2 tortoise brooches made from bronze, gilded, iron, white metal, and textiles, and were used to hold up a woolen overdress. The glass beads hung between the brooches, and an equal-arm brooch would typically be worn below the neck. The brooch is made from iron and textile, and these are all from a grave find in Uppland, Sweden. And on the right, these animal head brooches, like the other brooches, are worn in pairs on the chest of women's clothing. The brooches are distinctive to Gotland, Sweden, where these artifacts were found in a grave. The glass beads are part of a set that include 3 gold beads. The box-shaped brooch, made of gold and silver, would have been used to hold together a cloak or a scarf. Here's an example of a woman in reproduction clothing wearing matching brooches with glass beads hanging between. I've discussed the penannular brooch in my other videos, but as a refresher, penannular brooches are a type of pin worn by both men and women to hold their clothes into position, usually singly at the shoulder by men and on the breast by women. These brooches feature a long pin attached by its head to an incomplete ring. Now, if the ring is closed, the less efficient pin is referred to as a pseudo-penannular brooch. So here's 2 examples. On the left, the silver brooch has punch ornamentation and trumpet-shaped end knobs. It's from Gotland, Sweden. And on the right, the ends are shaped like animal ends, and it's from a grave find in Uppland, Sweden. Here's an example of how this type of brooch would have been used to fasten a woolen undergarment like the one seen here. Here's a mock-up close-up with modern fabrics to show how the brooch was used. Here's 2 other examples of this style of brooch. On the left, this brooch is decorated with punctuated triangles, which is very characteristic for the time. The end knobs are octagonal in the same style as Arabic weights. And on the right, in the center of the brooch, is an animal head that's depicted. Both eyes were originally made of glass, but only one is preserved. The end knobs are shaped as animal heads, and both of these brooches are from Gotland, Sweden. This spectacular brooch has a gripping beast motif in Boré style. The ring is made of silver, and the head of the bronze pin is also made of silver and forms the shape of a bearded demon. Here's another spectacular penannular brooch with animal-headed end knobs. The brooch is covered with thin silver plates and decorated with niello work. And in case you're wondering what that is, it's a deep black metal mixture that is fused onto metal for decorative effect. At the center of the brooch is a large animal face in Boré style. That style ranged from the late 9th to late 10th century. And this Boré style incorporates a range of geometric interlaced knot patterns and animal motifs. And it's from Gotland, Sweden. Usually ornamented in leaf decoration, trefoil brooches are based on the trefoil harness mounts, or decorative rivets from Germany. The design became so popular that they were locally produced throughout Scandinavia. The brooch could be worn either pointing upward or downwards. This brooch is of European Frankish provenance. It's decorated with palmettes showing plant ornamentation in the Carolingian style of metalwork. This style originates from the Carolingian Renaissance between 780 to 900. Here are two more examples of trefoil-style brooches. On the left, the ornamentation is similar to the style seen in finds from Finnish areas in upland Sweden. And on the right, it's of Scandinavian provenance. The triangular central part was originally filled with gold, animal ornamentation in gelling style from Skane, Sweden. While we might assume that Viking history is rooted in Scandinavia, it wasn't until the 1960s that proof of the Viking presence in North America came with the discovery of a small bronze cloak pin typical of 10th century Norse style. The bronze pin pictured here was discovered at a site called Lanso Meadows on the northmost tip of Newfoundland's Great North Peninsula, and you can still visit the site today. Here's two more examples of Viking-era brooches. On the left, we have a Broa-style grave find from Västmanland, Sweden, and on the right, we have a Borre grave find from Uppland, Sweden. Here's another equal-armed brooch made of bronze, iron, and textile, and it's from a grave find in Uppland, Sweden. This particular brooch, we were lucky enough to get both a top and side view, and it's a round brooch made of silver, and it's from Uppland, Sweden. Here's another silver brooch from a hoard find from Södermanland, Sweden. And finally, we have this box-shaped brooch, which is made of bronze, silver, and gilded, and it's from Gotland, Sweden. While the Vikings' reputation might describe them as raiders and plunderers, the Vikings were mostly peaceful traders, while many of them were farmers, hunters, and craftsmen. Despite this, weapons are always an area of excitement at exhibitions like this. In fact, there was such a crowd around these artifacts that we could barely get a look. So here we have a sword on the left that's made of iron and silver. The pommel is decorated with silver inlays, and it's from a grave find in Soleron. And on the right is a spearhead made of iron and silver as well. Runic inscriptions on the silver-coated socket read, "Rain owns this spearhead, Boatfuss carved." Weapons with runic inscriptions are rare, and this one is decorated with silver, which makes it one of a kind. The ornamentation is an example of a particularly fine craftsmanship. According to the ROM, in 1931, the so-called Beardmore sword was reportedly discovered in Thunder Bay, Ontario, alongside several other Norse artifacts. It is now widely accepted that the relics are authentically Norse, but they were planted there in the first quarter or so of the 20th century. James Edward Dodd claimed he found them while prospecting for gold in the area. The objects appear to be Norwegian in manufacture. Pictured here is a reproduction of an Iron Viking helmet. The original is actually from Germundbu, Norway, and it's one of the very few known Viking Age helmets. On the right is the original helmet that's from a museum in Oslo, Sweden. So despite popular belief, Vikings did not wear horns on their helmets. There was some speculation that it was actually 19th century Swedish painter August Malmström who was responsible for inventing this look, or even Richard Wagner for the Ring Cycle opera who was behind it. And while the performers wore helmets festooned with wings, I couldn't find any evidence to support that theory behind the horns. Art during the Viking Age was primarily decorative and used to ornament a variety of objects. Even functional weapons often had artistic elements. This iron axe, for instance, includes a design motif based on vegetation, and it's from Gotland, Sweden. That ends our exploration of the artifacts of the Vikings exhibit. I'd like to thank the ROM for inviting us, and special thanks to Jack for taking many of these awesome pictures from the exhibit. The exhibit runs until April 4th, so if you plan to be in Toronto, make sure to include it in your visit. I'll leave a link in the description so you can find out about how to buy tickets. And if you liked this video, please consider liking and sharing it with your friends. And as always, thank you so much for watching.